Hello, and welcome to Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program that goes beyond the headlines and sound bites and brings you the real details behind the stories facing Hoosiers across the state of Indiana. Our panel today are our good friends, Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Adam Kirch, Mary Beth Schneider, former reporter for the Indy Star, and Kyle Walker, former chairman of the Marion County Republican Party. So everybody, thank you all very much for being with us today.
Glad to be here.
All right, lots of stuff this week, and just only like a half hour to do it, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. First U.S. Senate debate, all three candidates on stage, Joe Donnelly, Mike Braun, Lucy Britton, for the first time at Purdue University Northwest. Very sort of amped up in the topics, healthcare, tax cuts, the Kavanaugh appointment, and even a unicorn was brought into the discussion as well. So, Mary Beth, we'll start with you. How they do, does this move the needle any?
Actually, I kind of doubt it moves the needle very much. I do think people's opinions are fairly well locked in, and these kind of debates don't get a huge audience. Having said that, I thought Donnelly, on one hand, was more aggressive in a good way the Democrats would like to see. But at the same time, every time he mentions how he voted with Trump on something, I can just see some of the more liberal Democrats smacking their heads and wondering, does it matter? I did not think Mike Braun had a good night. I thought in the primary he was really personable and was able to draw distinctions better. I think it's very hard to draw distinctions saying if you want business as usual, vote for the guy who's actually not in power in any way. When your own party is in charge of everything, it's hard to use that line, I think, effectively. I think he could have done better. And at least I think people left the debate knowing who Lucy Britton is. So,
Adam, let's go over to you. How did Joe Donnelly do, particularly walking that sort of fine line between trying to keep the base sort of on board, but also at the same time reaching out maybe to some of those more moderate, Trump voters?
Well, I think to Mary Beth's point, the viewership for Senate debates is relatively low. I think you've got a whole lot of hardcores on one side and a whole lot of hardcores on the other, and then I think you do have a narrow segment of legitimately undecided and interested voters. Perhaps not shockingly, I think Joe Donnelly acquitted himself well during the debate. I think he won because he kept his focus on health care, which is going to be the issue that decides this race.
Mr. Walker, I'm assuming you're going to probably take a little bit of a different approach than Adam. I'm just guessing. I could be wrong.
Well, it's a difficult situation for Donnelly anytime, a debate or anytime he's actually talking about the issues that face Hoosiers because, as it was proven at the debate and as it's proven time and again, he says one thing here, he votes another way when he's in Washington, D.C. And so I think that Braun was successful in articulating that Donnelly votes with Schumer and the Democrats 73% of the time. He was against the tax cuts. He was against Kavanaugh. He was against a lot of things that Hoosiers support. And so I think for those reasons, it was, a success for Braun and a tough night for Donnelly.
Brad, Lucy Britton, I remember her debate performance back in 2016 with Evan Bayh, Todd Young, not necessarily one of her better moments. I thought she actually did a lot better this go around than she did in the last debate. But once again, will it be enough, to move the needle for at least some of whoever might have been undecided in that audience that night?
She's certainly matured as a candidate, and I think she did a much better job this time around, which it helps. I mean, she's only 2 years removed from being in that setting, whereas everybody else is, well, I guess Mike Braun's been doing it a lot lately. But in any case, she did well, and I think that what she served to do was this is the time of year where libertarians in the polls kind of peak, and a lot of our voters start to erode and they buy into that wasted vote argument. I think Lucy did a very good job of shoring up her support to make sure that those voters don't go elsewhere. I thought it was fascinating. I know not a lot of people who aren't insiders watch that, but I got like 3 text messages from people that are decidedly in the other parties saying Lucy won my vote tonight.
And let me ask you about that, Mary Beth, because I thought that was something interesting too, just watching anecdotally some of the social media feed from people who actually did watch it. A lot of them did say that they thought the Libertarian did a lot better than what they expected the Libertarian to do, even if they may not necessarily have agreed with what some of the things she had to say. I know you had some issues with the whole thing about Abraham Lincoln and World War II.
I thought she lost me sometimes. When she was talking about foreign entanglements and brings up World War II, who's against defeating Hitler? Why would you bring that up even? Lincoln, oh my gosh, we all love Abraham Lincoln. And her answer on abortion was so confusing. I wasn't sure until later whether she was for or against. And so she confused me at times, and maybe it's because she was trying to cram in a lot sometimes in one 20, 30-second answer.
Adam, I want to say Joe Donnelly, watching him that night, a lot more aggressive, a lot more animated than usual. There was some concern that Joe might have been a little bit too aggressive. Any talk or chatter about that?
I don't think so. I think if we're looking for one moment of the debate, I think it came when Mike Braun refused to not support the Republican lawsuit to end Obamacare. That would eliminate pre-existing conditions. And quite frankly, if he supports pre-existing conditions as he claims to, he would easily say he doesn't support the lawsuit. He didn't, and I think that's the takeaway from the debate, that Mike Braun wants to eliminate pre-existing conditions.
Kyle, what do you think the takeaway from the debate was?
Joe Donnelly doesn't vote with Hoosiers. I mean, 73% of the time he votes with Chuck Schumer and the Democrats, and he voted against the tax cuts. He voted against Kavanaugh. He votes against the interests of Hoosiers almost every time he votes.
You're watching Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program that focuses on the concerns facing the state of Indiana. Our guests today are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Adam Kirch, Mary Beth Schneider, former Indianapolis Star reporter, and Kyle Walker, former chairman of the Marion County Republican Party. They all start looking like
two sides of the same coin.
Well, another big news item this week that kind of came out of nowhere. House Speaker Brian Bosma, Indiana Democrats calling on Governor Eric Holcomb to investigate allegations against the speaker involving a decades-old allegation of a sexual relationship with an intern, now married at the time. The speaker denies anything happened. There was talk about, we had an attorney, whether the attorney's background checks too aggressive. Brad, let me start with you. What does this do for this current election season, or is this a story at all?
It's a story in so much as it's somewhat hypocritical. So I don't know. I don't think most people are going to notice.
Adam, what do you think?
Well, I think the issue is not the affair Brian Bosma had with an intern 20 years ago. The issue is the conduct of the lawyer to intimidate and try and silence, in the words of one of the experts, cover up the relationship. The response to the Republicans is interesting. They say the accusations are uncorroborated. That's just not true. There's two members of the legislature who say the incident happened. The woman's family has corroborated the allegations. I think we're going to have to hear more from Brian Bosma, and him leading the charge to create sexual harassment policy for the legislature is certainly interesting.
Are we in sort of an awkward place, Mary Beth? Because not only this is allegations against the Speaker of the House, one of the most powerful figures in Indiana government. This comes on the heel of not only the Curtis Hill allegations from earlier this year that the Speaker called on the Attorney General to resign, but also we had Brett Kavanaugh in the middle of all this, sort of dealing with the timeline of how far back do you go, and does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? How do you assess where we are with all this?
Whiplash. Yeah, I mean, on one hand, Curtis Hill we're told by Governor Brian Bosma, should resign. Then the Republicans are for Kavanaugh. Don't worry about those either. It didn't happen, or she's confused. And then you have this. We should have an investigation. I'm so confused about where they stand on any one case, and it all seems to be situational ethics. My first session of the legislature was 1991. This apparently happened in 92, and I've been hearing about it since then, always third hand, always just as a sex story snickered about in the hallways. Every time something came up about a legislature, somebody would say, remember that about Brian Bosma? And I never expected to see it in print, frankly, because a story that's simply about a sexual contact between two people is unlikely to be considered something that you're going to be able to base a news story on until he hires an attorney, not just any attorney, former Democratic candidate for Attorney General who is a woman. You can't get a better choice than that. But why he chose to do that and make it a story, they are all in an awkward position now with Curtis Hill, I think.
Let me get you to follow up on that, Kyle, because one of the things, too, is, we are now in sort of this, in a different kind of universe than, say, maybe we were 10, 15 years ago. Is this just one of the things that an elected official has to do, maybe more aggressive on, on the background checks of folks, or as Mary Beth said, this wouldn't have been the story. This isn't the story, but for the tactics of the attorneys that they hired.
Well, and I think that's an interesting point that the Democrats in particular are taking exception with the tactics that the attorney used, being that the attorney is Linda Pence, who was their candidate for Attorney General in 2008, and obviously was sort of leading this investigation. And look, if you're alleged to have done something that you vehemently deny, I think it makes some sense to do what you can to disprove that. I think further investigation called for by the governor is probably appropriate. I would assume that Speaker Bosma would be okay with that, as if these allegations are untrue, it will corroborate his side of the story.
Will this matter politically speaking? I mean, we're less than 30 days away, from an election. Will this have an impact on the speaker's race? I mean, it's House District 188, northeastern Indianapolis, so that southern portion of Hamilton County. It's a very Republican district. I think the last time the speaker won like 80-20. Anybody feel free to jump in. Will this matter in his race in particular?
I don't think it's going to matter in this race. It might have a little bit of an impact on leadership moving forward. And I said earlier it was hypocritical in so much as he's been beating the family values drum for 20 years now. And, I mean, Mary Beth's right. This rumor's been out there for a while. And I think that there's something probably to it. However, this issue seems to be between Brian Bosma and his wife and not so much Brian Bosma and the public.
Well, I mean, we don't know what's going to be an issue. Even with 4 weeks to go with an election, there may be 6 more issues between now and then to come up.
Or could something change by the time we're done taping this program today?
we could be out of date by the time we wrap. I think Mary Beth is right. I think the tactics of the investigation are what's at issue here. If he had an affair and this allegation come out and he had said, "This is between my wife and I. This is 25 years ago," the Star doesn't have a story to run. As someone who conducts background investigations professionally, this is not the investigation you run if you're just trying to refute a false story. This is the accusation you run if you're trying to discredit an accuser, if you're trying to silence an accuser. And that's what the experts the Star consulted said. This is designed to cover up and intimidate somebody, not to find the truth.
You're watching Indiana Issues, the online public affairs program where we talk about the big issues of the day. Our guests are Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Adam Kirch, Democrat, Mary Beth Schneider, Indianapolis Star, and Kyle Walker, former chairman of the Marion County Republican Party. A couple new polls out since we last all got together in the U.S. Senate race. A Reuters poll, if we can get it up on the screen there, shows that once again an almost statistically tied race. Joe Donnelly, 46%, 43% Mike Braun, 3% other. One number not in there was 8%, but basically folks have said sort of none of the above. And contrast that with a Fox News poll. Once again, a very close race. Braun 43, Donnelly 41, but this one, Lucy Brenton 6%. Brad Klopfenstein, what do these polls mean, if anything?
Who's other? Why would you run a poll that gives other as an option when there's only one other candidate? I don't know. I mean, I think the polls give us a snapshot of where we are right now. Things are going to change. There's 8% undecided. There's going to be some shifts. I think without there being a major gaffe by one of the candidates, these numbers probably aren't going to move much between now and the election, and we're really not going to know until they start counting votes.
Kyle, let me jump over you because for the most part, the numbers have stayed pretty consistent. They may move a little bit, but still fundamentally a statistical tie, or within the margin of error. We've had millions of dollars spent here in Indiana. I think analysis at almost maybe like $30 million, and all we have to show for it is still a close race. What does that tell you? Well,
I think it is a close race, although I have seen recent polling where there is significant movement by Braun, and I think it's because what you know, all of us that have worked in politics, if you're running for re-election and you're below 50, you're in the danger zone. Donnelly has consistently polled below 50, typically in the low 40s. I think he's pretty much hit his high water mark at this point. You see Lucy Brenton, she's gaining a couple of percent here and there. All of the upward movement is in the favor of Braun, and all of the room to grow is in favor of Braun. So, I mean, I think as Election Day approaches, you'll see that I do think it'll probably still be a close race statistically, but I think Braun will take the lead and win on Election Day.
What about that, Adam? Sort of that Joe Donnelly. I think it was maybe like one poll, maybe like the Gravis Marketing early on this year that had him above 50%. Everything else has been in sort of those low mid 40s. What does that tell you?
Well, I don't think anyone needs a poll in this race to say it's a close race. It's been close from the beginning. It was always going to be close. It'll be close all the way through Election Day. I think we're going to see some marginal movement here and there. But fundamentally, I think Hoosiers will reward Joe Donnelly for his hard work in the United States Senate and being where Hoosiers are, taking a careful look at each issue and voting the way that reflects his conscience. To Kyle's point about all the momentum is on Braun's side, what's interesting is we're seeing all of these stories about Republican dissatisfaction with the campaign Braun is mounting. His statewide tour that had, 3 or 4 events in the same weekend that Joe Donnelly did 60-some around the state. To that point, a close race favors the better campaign. I think that's on Joe Donnelly's side.
Mary Beth, I know you're not a big fan of polls since 2016.
Even before that.
Even before that.
Yeah.
But once again, here we are in the home stretch in a state that Donald Trump won by 20 points. Joe and Mike are still tied, and Lucy, has enough of the vote to, make a difference.
Yeah, so I sort of believe, you don't need a weatherman to know which way the wind blows. But in this case, I think it simply is close. And I, again, don't need a poll to tell me that. I think that what I'm going to be looking for more is organization. Democrats, and I've never understood this, they are terrible about coming out in the midterms. And so can they somehow get those people out? Young people who tend to vote Democratic seldom vote at all in this year. So will those people get out? What kind of early voting are we going to see? There are more opportunities in Marion County and some other Democratic places that weren't there in the past. Will that make a difference? I think will Republicans, however, coast? Because I don't think they should feel that, midterms are our bag. I don't think that is true in this race necessarily because, again, Indiana, as general, would tend to favor Braun, but I think Donnelly's run the better campaign. His ads are definitely better. I've been really surprised by Braun's ads because I really liked him kind of in the primary. And they're nothing but angry now. And I think that's a mistake. I think there ought to be something about what I will do positive, not just tearing down the other guy.
Well, one of the big items that, of course, will impact the race, or we're not quite sure yet, is Brett Kavanaugh's confirmation to the U.S. Supreme Court. Joe Donnelly was a no vote, citing temperament. Republicans attacked him on that, saying he was taking his marching orders from Chuck Schumer, was never planning to vote yes to begin with, even though all the allegations in the middle. Is this one of those situations? I had sort of this weird theory. I'd love to get you guys' thoughts, that it would have been better for the Republicans had Brett Kavanaugh lost the confirmation and Joe Donnelly be a no vote, as to Joe Donnelly being a no vote and Kavanaugh gets confirmed, because unless you're my wife, you can't get what you want and still stay mad 20-something odd days later for something your husband allegedly did that no one was ever able to prove. So, Kyle, we'll start with you.
Probably. I mean, had he not been confirmed and Joe Donnelly had been a no vote, as he was, it probably would have helped sustain that anger longer. But, the Democrats, frankly, are helping sustain that anger each and every day. I mean, they're not letting it go. They're talking about trying to find ways to impeach him. They're talking about ways to try to impeach the president, right? These things make Republicans very angry and very motivated to vote on Election Day.
Adam, should Democrats let the Kavanaugh issue go? Hey, he's there. He's done. We just need to make sure we have our people that we can elect on the next day. And, any talk of any possible impeachment, just sort of, push that to the side.
Well, I think you're seeing talk of impeachment from fringe. I don't think you're seeing any member of the United States Congress talking about impeaching Brett Kavanaugh. To the question whether does it affect the race, the interesting one is the Donnelly campaign saw an uptick in volunteer and donations after the Kavanaugh vote. The fact is that Kavanaugh, he was always going to vote against Kavanaugh. That was absolutely not the perception among the donor and volunteer class of the Democratic Party. So in that way, I think the vote probably helps Joe Donnelly in that it motivates his volunteers coming into the last stretch.
Does this? How much of a difference do you think all this is going to make, Brad, at the end of the day?
It's not going to make a lot. I think Donnelly probably would have done himself a favor by using the Lucy Brenton argument when she said that she wouldn't have voted for Kavanaugh because he's soft on the Fourth and Fifth Amendments. Donnelly has kind of changed his position on why he was a no vote, and I don't know that serves him well, whereas if he could have come out strong with some specifics, he probably could have taken the high road on this. I think it ends up being a push. But, Abdul, I also think that you're right, that probably the Republicans could have benefited by having this drag out a little bit longer and make people feel like they're under attack.
Well, the U.S. Senate race, obviously not the only race getting attention. Bernie Sanders will be in Indiana in a week or so campaigning for Liz Watson. As we tape this program this weekend, you have the Vice President Mike Pence coming into Indianapolis. You've got former Vice President Joe Biden up in the region trying to get those Northwest Indiana Democrats to come out and vote. Jackie Walorski have our town hall or first debate with Mel Hall, Courtney Trish, lamenting the tone of politics. As we look out over the political landscape, Mary Beth, expect any major changes, or even though with all the noise, at least at the congressional level, things will stay the same?
I don't see any huge differences. I mean, I think sometimes it's too bad because these races are really important, but everything that happens with Trump just seems to overshadow everything else, and it's hard to get any kind of discussion about Indiana office holders, Indiana politics. I don't see Bernie Sanders as being a huge help to anybody, frankly. I think Biden coming in is a help for Donnelly. I think Pence coming in is a help, but Bernie Sanders, and he tends to gin up a small segment of the Democratic base, but they don't. Those people wouldn't even call themselves Democrats. They're just liberals, and they are, they're iffy, frankly, on Donnelly already. I don't know that he can make much difference for him.
Adam, does Bernie Sanders help or hurt showing up? I mean, he did win Indiana in the primary.
Bernie, I think to some degree, there's almost nobody coming in and campaigning for you who doesn't help at some level. That's why Mike Pence is finally coming in to help Braun after saying it's his most important race. If Mike Pence was a big help to Mike Braun, he would be in the state a lot more than he has been. He's coming in for the GOP dinner. That's as much to help the state party as it is Braun. But at some level, I think everybody helps. Bernie Sanders brings out some people. Joe Biden brings out a lot more, and potentially without the political blowback. Does they hurt? I don't really think so.
See, I disagree with Bernie Sanders. I mean, he did win the state, but actually that district was the worst performance he had. He lost that district to Hillary Clinton. So there's already at least half of the Democrats that don't particularly – he was at least their second choice or most. And for Republicans in the 9th District, Bernie Sanders does not play well. And so I think that it's a net loss for Les Watson to have Bernie come in, whether it's in the People's Republic of Bloomington or not. And,
he's not even a Democrat.
Well, yeah. And to your point about Pence, though, I mean, I can tell you the vice president has been very helpful to Mike Braun throughout the campaign. He's in town, obviously, this weekend, but for months he has been incredibly involved with trying to be beneficial to Mike Braun's campaign.
But he's been all over the country, and this is his first public event in Indiana since May. I mean, his absence is somewhat conspicuous.
Well, he's on television right now for Mike Braun, so I mean, this is the prime time in the election. So I mean, he's been there all along, and he'll continue to be there for him through Election Day.
Well, we got about 5 minutes. We've got to wrap up here, so I want to make sure we talk about the ground game. Early voting began this week here in Indiana. A number of county clerks telling me voter registration is up. Early absentee ballots are up, and it seems more like a presidential year than a midterm election year. Democrats are running candidates all over the state. Meanwhile, Republicans bragging the 1.5 million Hoosiers that they've reached for months being here. As we go into the final weeks of the campaign, Brad, we'll start with you. Who has the advantage?
I think it's kind of a toss-up. And Mary Beth mentioned this earlier. There's been so much focus on federal issues. The local candidates, A, can't buy airtime because it's already purchased, and B, nobody's really paying attention to those races. So those are going to really key on who's been getting out and meeting voters face-to-face, knocking on their doors. It's going to be hard to say. I'm encouraged by this. I think that gives Libertarians a little bit better advantage. We've got some good candidates in Henry County, down in Morgan County, and I think they're going to benefit by just being out there knocking on doors and being present. The party label is not going to be as big of an issue for them. For the other two parties, I don't know. It's going to be tough. I think Bernie Sanders coming to town is going to help in Bloomington to bring out millennials and younger voters because they don't seem to be very enthused. But I think there's going to be a lot of surprises on election night.
Adam?
I think the traditional rules of politics still apply, and at the very least, at the national level, you want to be the party who doesn't have the White House in the first midterm after a presidential election. The Democrats have built the largest ground game operation the state's ever seen in a midterm year. It is almost to the level of the 2008 and 2012 operations. So we'll see. I'm cautiously optimistic, but Democrats have found ways to snatch victory from the defeat from the jaws of victory in the past.
Kyle, what does it tell you? Like I said, when we look at all the voter registration and early absentee voting, and when I hear county clerks, Republican and Democrats, say this is more like a presidential year than a midterm year, and you have some voter registration as part of your past history.
Sure, yeah. The difficult part about comparing past elections over the last 20 years, really, even. There's more and more opportunities for early voting, early in-person voting. Absentee voting has been much more of a focus of both parties, and so it's a little tough. It's to compare, year to year, but it does look like there's a lot of interest from both parties this year, and the numbers seem to bear that out. The Republican Party has really invested into their ground game, into their voter outreach. They've been for months and months and months making millions of phone calls and knocking on doors. The grassroots game is probably the best I've ever seen in the state. And so, I think part of those numbers are a result of all of that effort by both the parties.
Mary Beth, as we've got about 60, 90 seconds and some change before we close up shop here, does this energy enthusiasm favor Republicans, Democrats, or is it fundamentally a wash?
I think it favors Democrats, but I don't see that big blue wave that you might see in some states in Indiana. But they don't need a huge wave. They need to stay competitive, and they haven't done that in the midterms before, so that will be what we'll be watching for. Do they pull it out this time?
Now we're at the point in our program we do our quick round of political prognostications and peer through the political leaders, see what our friends are looking at and paying attention to. Brad, what are you keeping an eye on?
I'm looking at Libertarian victories in Henry County and Morgan County, and a Libertarian U.S. Senator and Gary Johnson from New Mexico.
Adam?
Right now I'm focused on some state legislative races. Democrats have fielded candidates everywhere to the point of the ground game. I think there are almost to 22 candidates that have hit over 10,000 doors. That in and of itself is sort of outside the state party apparatus and is a good sign.
Mary Beth?
It's a little thing, but I'm interested in seeing whether Lucy Brenton breaks the 2% that you guys need.
Well, Mark Rutherford needs 2% for Libertarian.
I'm sorry, I said Lucy
about,
Brenton. I meant Mark Rutherford.
10%
yes,
gets us into primaries, which is kind of the goal.
It's very important for them to be able to stay on the ballot. It's a little thing that not very many people other than Libertarians look at that night, but I always did.
Kyle?
Braun defeats Donnelly. We hold on to all of our congressional seats. We hold majorities in the Indiana House and Senate.
My prediction, look for some new polling in the U.S. Senate race, Secretary of State's race, and maybe some favorable, unfavorables of Indiana's political class coming out the week of the 22nd. How do I say that? Because I wrote the check the other day and mailed it to the pollster. Our guests today have been Libertarian Brad Klopfenstein, Democrat Adam Kirch, Mary Beth Schneider, former reporter for the Indianapolis Star, and Kyle Walker, former chairman of the Marion County Republican Party. Everybody, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Abdul.
And thank you for joining us, and special thanks to our friends here at Edge Media Studios in downtown Indianapolis for hosting us today. We appreciate it. Thanks for being with us, and we'll talk to you next time on Indiana Issues.